Well, thanks everybody for joining me this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are. The genesis of this discussion over the next, say, 25, 30 minutes really comes out of my experience running and facilitating tabletop exercises across a variety of organizations. I think maybe 2 dozen in the last 18 months. And I really wanted to kind of pull some of the commonalities of where things sit in terms of gaps and where organizations really kind of have some struggles and really kind of highlight those. What we'll be looking at today, we'll look at tabletop exercises a little bit in focus, kind of where we are, where I see things, and as was pointed out, very important for us to do. We're going to look at 7 scenarios, specific scenarios. This is what I say when I talked about the commonality of where I see organizations suffer these gaps. What do you do when you're exercising these and then trying to figure out where the gaps are? What are kind of some of the real common, hey, we have a problem here, we have a gap, we don't have a process for this. How do you identify that? How is that going to click in your mind and to say, hey, moving this into an offline discussion, or really much more of a process to fill in those gaps? And then we'll kind of look through what I use as a short roadmap. I wouldn't say roadmap, more like a little trail, just kind of get your organization focused on those gaps so that when we have those identified, we can really pivot into and really start picking apart that. First, who am I? Gerard, everybody here, it's Jerry. I get to shorten my name to Jerry. I've been in the industry about a little over a decade. On the private side, I got started in law enforcement, did a mid-career change, pivoted into the private sector. Uh, got a lot of certs and background in that regard. As was said, I'm actually working on the 4th edition of Digital Forensics and Incident Response. I'm by happenstance working on the ransomware chapters right now. So look forward to that. Hopefully getting that wrapped up by the end of the year. And I'm based out of Rapid City, South Dakota. So if you're not familiar with the geographical area of the United States, it's one of the rectangles in the middle. What are we talking about when we talk about tabletop exercise? I think if you've never been part of one, you're familiar with it, but just to kind of level set where we are. This is essentially a sitting around a table, hence tabletop, and working through a scenario. Not technically, we're not doing any validation, vulnerability assessment, threat assessment. What we're really looking at is really answering the question is, what if? What if this happened? What if snakes got into the data center? Those kind of things. It really is there to improve the overall security program in really kind of a cost-effective, low-cost, really, way of looking at specific processes. What I've seen, though, on really kind of the positive end is we're moving away from this kind of perfunctory exercise we did maybe a decade ago. Was our audit's coming up, we need to do a tabletop exercise. So let's get everybody in a room, bring in a facilitator, and we just go through the motions. I see we're moving away from that, and right now I think organizations really highlight the importance of having this type of exercise and using it to improve overall security. With that, I'm seeing organizations want to do these multiple times per year, not the 4 hour or maybe multi-day tabletop exercise. If you're a large organization and you want to pull in a executive committee, I refer to as XCOM, all of the other ancillary service providers, internal, external stakeholders, but really kind of focusing on a critical aspect, maybe 20 to 30 minutes once a month, or maybe a 1 or 2 hour once a quarter. One of the other things is to start focusing on specific aspects of incident response. We don't necessarily need to do the entire from detection all the way to post-incident activity, but really focus on, hey, how do we handle eradication and recovery? So this is kind of where we are. And with that, really defining what we're doing from an objective perspective. Obviously, as I said, we're not here testing vulnerabilities. We're not doing a purple team exercise. That's a whole different type of exercise. We're looking at, are we set with technical plans and playbooks? Do we have the technical knowledge recorded so that we can execute on issues that we come up? Intra-team coordination. how your team works together. Say your security operation or your incident response team, how do they work together? That's very important. Inter-team coordination. A ransomware incident is a full court press. Everybody's going to be involved, from marketing and communications to your legal department to your finance. How do all of those teams work together with your security or your incident response teams? How do you work together with a third-party service provider like a breach coach or a ransomware negotiation team? So all of those teams all have to coordinate together. Our objective overall is to identify gaps in decision and planning and how we coordinate. And then also think about it this way. If you've done a few of these and you're bringing new people in, new teams, gives them a really good way to get familiarized with the process and improvement and put a face to the name when they're talking, hey, this is what marketing would do. This is what our finance department would do. They're going to cut checks to get us hotel rooms at the primary data center, those kind of things. So the meat of this and why we're here is to look at 7 scenarios. So these are, again, commonalities that I see, having facilitated, 24, 25 of these in the last 18 months. My experience working in the sector also in live response. We're also going to look at matching current situations. This is things that we are currently seeing from ransomware investigations across the board. So these are common things that we might want to include because they're what we're seeing in the real world. You can take any one of these scenarios or all 7 and put them into an overall exercise. If you have that ability to do a 4-hour, I recommend hitting all 7 of these and then increasing them. As the next bullet point down says, these are not all inclusive, right? Please don't take this and go, hey, we did the 7 that Jerry said, so we're set. No, these are ones that are fairly common. What I would say is, when you get to a little bit better, we'll talk about roadmap later, is there's more and more things that are coming down the pipe as we continue to deal with this issue. I like these because I think they provide a good foundation for critical components. This is what, when we start to look at key decisions that are going to take some time, we really can focus on these specific scenarios to really build that foundation. So I'll kind of set this up very much like a little tabletop for ourselves. I'm going to set the scenario, give you an inject, talk about why this is important, then we'll look at key performance indicators for each one of these. So we start off. The Security Operations Center has detected several systems communicating with a suspected command and control server and has created a priority 1 ticket. Fairly straightforward, right? Not something that we need to really concern ourselves with. We can just move on from there. Well, not really. If you think back to maybe even 5 years ago, even 2 or 3 years ago, we had a fairly robust, kind of concrete definition of what an incident is. Incident has become a loaded word. Here we see the SEC Form 8K. This has to be filed for publicly held corporations that have a material breach. So our definition, the literal word definition, incident, is loaded now. We now have to understand, how do we escalate this from that priority 1 ticket and call it an incident? Because now it has a whole bunch of other work streams attached to it. So when we're looking at key performance indicators, when I kick this off, what I'm looking for, that organization has a clearly defined path from security operations all the way to the incident commander. Who's named, who's going to start making decisions, who's going to start pulling people into this. That incident declaration, right, does not need to wait. We can call it whatever we want. If we are going to say we're going to call it a threat, we're going to call it a detection or events, that's fine, perfect. But have some sort of incident declaration right off the bat. As we saw in this case, the security operations, the SOC, gave it a priority 1. We may have to declare now, or we're going to have to do some sort of massage into the data to get to that point. But we don't need to wait on specific things down the road. We need to start taking action now. And that gets into, what are we going to say? Is this an event? Is this a detection? Is it an incident? Especially if we have loaded language. If we say incident and it brings into a lot of governance risk and compliance issues before we have all of the information, it may be better to say, hey, this is a detection, and we escalate it to an incident through that clearly defined path. Authority. This gets to intra-team coordination. Who has the authority in the team? And then maybe we have to go inter-team coordination. That's legal and compliance considerations with declaring an incident. So as you see right off the bat, something as simple as an incident declaration has now gotten more complex, and we're now bringing in much more to bear just on the onset. So let's say we get into that incident declaration, and our security manager has contacted our third-party DFIR consulting firm. They're getting their personnel together for a scoping discussion. So this is what I saw. Oftentimes is this can take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. So what are we going to do while we wait? So this is very, very simply a sample of service level agreement or service level objective, depending on the contractual obligations. That severity 1 has an initial response of 1 hour. That may be an objective. It's not written in stone. We may have to wait 90 minutes. If this kicks off on a Saturday morning at 2 a.m., it's going to take us longer to get that team pulled in. So what you want to see when you talk about injecting this type of process into it is, have we identified those service level objectives? Do we know that if we pull in Acme DFIR, it's going to take 2 hours for them to go hands on keyboard? Yeah, that's kind of a deficiency, because as we see, ransomware threat actors are moving very rapidly now, but at least we understand it. Now what we do is we fill in that time. While we're waiting for them, do we have to go out and make sure that they have access to our Entra environment or our Sentinel instance, or maybe we have Splunk and we have accounts that are disabled that all we have to do is enable for our third-party provider, so that scoping call comes in, they're immediately hands-on keyboard. We may have capturing key evidence artifacts as part of that while you wait in that time period. One of the recommendations I make is, if you have a third-party provider or are a third-party provider, is talk to your customers, talk to your providers about, hey, is there a process that we can do while you are getting spun up over here? We can start collecting, whether we're using CAPE and pushing everything to S3 that you can access later, or a central location on our environment. Maybe they have a data lake. Maybe they have a specific tool that they want you to use. That's really, really critical, because what you're doing is taking advantage of that time right on the onset while they're getting spun up. Other thing to think about, and we'll talk a little bit about this, is isolation containment actions. What can you do immediately before anything else? So the old kind of notion was, we called our DFIR firm, they're spinning up. It may be an hour before we have even a scoping call. So we need to get into that cycle and make sure that we're hitting those key performance indicators in that flow time, so that we're actually not waiting on anything once that scoping call is done. All right, so we bring in that firm, and an analysis of several systems has uncovered connections from the enterprise to multiple Azure tenants. Cloud pivot, very common. As we see, here's one from Microsoft's threat intel, the Storm 0501, this ransomware attack. What do we need to do here? So very simply, we're taking this inject, all right? Do you incorporate cloud environments into your IRP? Do you even identify that? If you've gone through that yearly review and you still haven't updated to, hey, we use AWS for apps, we're using Microsoft for all of these different apps between M365 and potentially even Entra ID for all of our Active Directory needs. Do we have that? Expertise. This doesn't necessarily mean incident response expertise, but do you have DevOps as part of your cloud security? This is very critical because it's a highly complex environment. So you want to have an understanding of what expertise you have in there. Going to that inter-team coordination, pulling DevOps into your incident response may be necessary. Do you have visibility? CloudTrail, UAL, all of that. How are threat actors accessing your cloud environment? This is, as we see, this is ever evolving. So have that expertise. Do you have to pull in somebody specific? There's a number of different organizations out there that are working specifically in the cloud. So have an understanding, can we leverage those? And access to resources. Can we get to the specific tenant that we're dealing with? Does our security team have the necessary permissions in there? That goes to that maybe Entra ID break glass account. All right, so we're pivoting off, and we have basically the worst case scenario. Well, not the worst case scenario yet, but it's pretty bad. Significant ransomware incident impacts a range of services, including your security and response tools. This is one that you can proactively start to look at. So here we have the situation, ransomware has just completely bricked everything, and we need to get off the network and move everything into the cloud. So here's just kind of a, for lack of a better term, a cave person drawing that I did of what it would look like. Here we have S3 with a bunch of EC2 and say an AWS instance. We've got our SIFT, we've got our SoftElk, we've got our Velociraptor. Potentially, we have a couple of Windows systems with all of our tools there, maybe a couple of Linux. We have D for Iris running in a Docker container. All of this is off the network into our own segmented cloud that we can leverage that won't be impacted by this. So what do we want? We want contingencies for off-network resources. This is soup to nuts. All right. Imagine that the data center is just full of snakes and we can't use it. What are we going to do? The beauty of this, when you start working this through a tabletop, is you can get this configured fairly low cost. Obviously, you're paying for access to those resources in AWS or Azure or Google, but we're not doing a whole bunch of compute just yet. We could have a bunch of systems that are literally in a pause state and not have to worry about them. All right. Other thing, what about network connectivity? We're going to get into containment, and this comes up a lot in containment. What if we have to completely remove ourselves from the internet? What does that look like? So do we have 4G, 5G hotspots? Do we have Xfinity off band that we can use? Just, get a fiber license from them and be able to hook up into them. So considerations there. Pre-stage D for resources, right? In cloud providers, that was just what we were talking about, is have those resources up and running so that you don't have to worry about restoring your systems first. You already have them up. And then also look at alternative communication. If your Entra ID environment is completely owned and you can't use Teams, what are you going to use? All right. And then what incident command, incident management tools are available. All right, so we have our IR analysts come back. They say, hey, we've identified the C2 channel and the domain. Awesome, we can start doing some containment. What's the difference between isolation and containment? This is one of the things that I like to work with too. Isolation generally focuses on an endpoint that's done through an EDR. Usually your security operations has authority to do that. Awesome. Containment, we're looking at a lot of network, a lot of switching and routing, whether that's virtual or hard, all of those things that come into containing that threat. So what do we want? IR plans and playbooks that do containment actions, right? Because we've got multiple teams, inter-team coordination here. Our firewall team, obviously managing firewalls. We may have a network op or network architecture that's managing the switching and routing. So we want to make sure that we differentiate north-south, that command and control, with our east-west, that lateral movement. Do we have containment strategies? Going back to that who's who in the zoo, necessary personnel are identified and they know their roles. We have 2 or 3 people on the network side. We have 2 or 3 people on the firewall side. We have 1 or 2 people in the cloud side. All of this comes to play here. Again, we're getting very complex. This isn't just, one team. We're talking multiple teams that have containment strategies. Access to everything is also critical. Make sure that your personnel have access to what they need. And this gets really sticky sometimes. This comes out during a lot of tabletops is, hey, I only have access to these systems. Okay, well, we need roles and responsibilities for all of that. So if we have to completely shut off a LAN segment, we need to have that person have that authority. Finally, somebody needs to be able to execute containment without authorization. This is a heavy lift. A lot of organizations kind of cringe at this, and I'm like, no, you need somebody that can say, hit the AZ5 button, shut the network down, go to that point. Obviously, with an understanding of what the impact is going to be. But I would rather be down for 4 hours than 2 weeks if it's that type of decision. All right. I said it was getting bad. It's still going to get a little bit worse for us here. The IR analysts have identified the threat actor accessing and exfiltrating the ntds.dit file from a primary domain controller. In the Slack channel, somebody was highlighting some reports from the DFIR report, and we see this a lot. I think there was the Cobalt Strike SOX breach that was indicated just a little while ago where they attempted to do this. Very common. A lot of intel on and a lot of tools that are used to do this. So what do we need to do? This is one of those that really organizations that I've seen, I drop it and they've said, well, we've discussed it, but we've not really gone too deep into this. So process or playbooks, however you work through this in terms of documenting your process, have a process. All right. What do we need to do if we have to go through the entire enterprise and reset everything? Identify what credentials you're going to scope in. Obviously, Kerberos infrastructure, service accounts, all of the interactive users and administrators, right? Here's the big thing that you're going to pull out of this. That's often the best outcome is you'll have a process, but more importantly, you will understand the impact of what this looks like. That is one of the key pieces of data that we need as maybe the incident response team or the IC that says, hey, we're going to have to do this. This is the impact. This is what we're going to have to do. How you're going to communicate this to your users, and then also finally test portions of this process. You may not be able to do the entire thing, but to say, hey, even if it's just a paper test going, if I had to reset all the service accounts, what happens? All right. We're going to wrap it up with one more and kind of talk about this. The incident is to go into its second day. Not unheard of, right? We have incidents that go into weeks. So some of your analysts are starting to make what I refer to as boneheaded mistakes. What does this indicate? Well, health and welfare is one of the major considerations that we don't understand or even incorporate into this. We have this notion, and IR people, security people are driven folk. They're going to run to the problem and they're just going to hammer this problem. Well, as we see here, we've had more and more discussions in recent times about health and welfare. So that inject, what we're looking for, hey, what do we do from a health and welfare perspective? How do we identify when people are starting to burn out from an incident? Can we bring in additional resources and rotate out our responders? Good rule of thumb, 12 hours. They don't allow truck drivers in the United States to drive more than 12 hours. If we're at hour 16, hour 17, and it looks like we're going to be doing this multi-days, it sounds counterintuitive, but I need to rotate people out. Because the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to get to day 2 and everybody's going to start making the boneheaded mistakes right then and there. Also think about using employee assistance programs. These are awesome for bringing in professionals, even if they're going to help you with that last bullet point, identifying those signs of burnout. So how do I know when I found something in one of these 7 scenarios or any additional scenarios that I need to pull a thread on? Well, what I call the 3 to 5 minute rule. I give organizations as a facilitator about 3 to 5 minutes to work through an inject. If we're sitting here at 5 minutes with no clear solution, no process, we take that discussion offline. AI is awesome. If you're running Zoom, you can just basically tell AI, hey, make a note. We need to take this offline. Also see guesswork. We take a stab at the solution or shooting arrows into the dark here. We could do this. I think we could do it this way. This may work. Yeah, a little bit of uncertainty is okay, but that kind of uncertainty is dangerous. So we don't want to have to try something the first time in an actual incident. So let's get a solution. If they don't have contingencies, what if our EDR goes down? Oh, we've never even thought about that. What if our EDR pushes a bad update? We haven't thought about that. What if this individual is not available? They're on vacation or they won the lottery. What are our contingencies there? All of these things are really good to identify, hey, these are where gaps are. Unclear roles and responsibilities. This is what I call the cross finger thing is, well, that's Bill's team. Well, no, that's Mary's team. And that's Jane's team. If we've got the unclarity there, again, clarity is key here. This individual is responsible for this. If they're not available, this individual is responsible. So unclear roles and responsibilities is a major indicator that you've got a gap. Let's say we have a gap. Where do we go from this? Very simple roadmap. Let's say we go and we don't have a process for that ntds.dit exfil, right? We record it. We get a working group, try to identify as many people that own part or whole that process. So we get that working group. And then what we do is just run that inject, and that's it. What do we do here? So in this case, we may pull in identity and access management, the CTO, CSO. We're going to develop a plan over the course of maybe 60 minutes. We're going to formalize that process. However your organization formalizes that plan or process. Here's the kicker. You're going to include that inject word for word if you want, or you can modify it a little bit the next time you do a tabletop exercise. And that is to familiarize, again, everybody with the process, identify inter-team coordinations, make sure your technical plans and playbooks are in place, and then move on from there. This is the easiest way I've found is just take it out of the scenario, put it into a working group, come up with a plan, low stress. Again, run it through that tabletop process again, just to verify, just to make sure everybody is able to execute on that. With that, feel free to pop in any questions. I'll be in Slack for a few, just going through the questions. If something pops in your mind, feel free to email me. There's also a link to go ahead and grab a PDF copy of the slides. But again, thank you, everybody. Thank you to SANS. Really appreciate the opportunity to come out and talk to you about something I'm really passionate about. I hope that came across. So thank you.